I'm going to predict the future. Yep. And I'm going to do it by looking at the 7 oldest stories and maybe the only stories ever known to mankind. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer, and this is Sutures and Sense, where we talk business to clinical and clinical to business. My right-hand man, Brian Pistone, is also looking into the future by looking at the 7 stories known to man. I'll explain that in a second. And again, if it's done right, Ryan was involved. If it was done poorly by me, it was me. We are Sutures and Sense. So here's what I mean. 20 years ago, a guy named Christopher Booker released a book, as a matter of fact, oddly enough, coincidentally, called The 7 Basic Plots, Why We Tell Stories. And I'm going to tell you what the plots are. And I'm telling you, it's everything from Beowulf to Star Wars to you pick it. Doesn't matter. You name your movie, you name your book. I think he might be right. So the 7 basic plots, here they are. And think about your favorite movie right now. See if your favorite movie or your favorite book falls into one of these 7 plots. Number 1, overcoming the monster. Number 2, rags to riches. Number 3, the quest. Number 4, the voyage and return. Number 5, rebirth. Number 6, comedy. Number 7, tragedy. I guarantee they fall into one of the 7, and maybe a couple of them, especially the last 2 seem to be a little bit broad-based, comedy and tragedy, but guaranteed. Overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, the voyage and return, rebirth, comedy, tragedy. Now, what the heck has that got to do with value analysis and medical device sales? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's why. Because everything you're experiencing now, it's been experienced before. And it's been written about, and it's been conquered, and perhaps the monster has been overcome, like that story from that Booker says is one of the plots, right? And I'm going to give an example again of the pharma. And I'm going to tell you how they got an even more difficult committee than the P&T committee, and an even more difficult committee than the value analysis committee to put their drugs on formulary. Now, listen, I'm not interested in hearing about PBMs and kickbacks and none of that stuff. Because I was involved. And I'm going to tell you what we did and how we got products on some of the most difficult formularies, approvals in healthcare. And I'm talking about you pick the insurance company. We got them approved. Here's what Pfizer did strategically and structurally. And this is where I think medical device is going. And I think we're starting to see some of it. Some companies already do it, but I don't think it's widely proliferated. That's hard to say, by the way, proliferated. But I think you're going to see more of it. And if you're a young rep, this might be something that you keep an eye on because you may have a trajectory into one of these positions. But either way, it's good to know. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, because it was effective. And what's happening in health systems now is what was happening back then with insurance plans and formularies. So here's how Pfizer addressed these health plans, right? Your insurance plan, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Geisinger, Kaiser Permanente, United. You pick the health plan, Optum, Independence Blue Cross. They had to get their drugs approved on those formularies, or literally millions of lives in the United States would not be able to get access to those drugs without at least paying a large copay, which most patients don't want, or they just weren't going to get it, right? Sometimes they rely on some samples if they were indigent, but the vast majority of people in that health plan with millions of lives covered could not get your product. How do you think that goes for your quota, by the way, and your sales? When you call on a bunch of doctor's offices and you're like, hey man, sorry, but 60% of my patients are Geisinger, and Geisinger doesn't approve this, I can't write it, right? Think about that. Sound familiar? I know it does. So here's what Pfizer did structurally. Okay. They would have a strategic accounts rep, and that strategic accounts rep called on the health plan at the time. They called on those large Independence Blue Crosses, Kaiser Permanente. They were smart people, right? They knew what they were doing. I remember being around them going, wow, these folks, they'd usually been in the business 10 to 15 years, very sharp, very savvy, and understood the drug down to the molecular level and understood the business and the competition and where it fit in. It's really interesting. Smart people. I remember listening to them at meetings going, wow, I'm learning a lot, right? But here's what those people would tell us, the regular everyday sales reps calling on somewhere between 100 and 200 doctors' offices. The health plan will not approve it unless there's demand. You need to drive demand. And we would say, well, our folks, our customers, the doctors we call on, they're not going to write it. So how do we create demand? And what we did structurally was those large strategic account reps would say, you got to go talk about it, and you got to go get doctors to say, I'm going to write it. I'm going to try it. And that's what we would do. And I would stand in front of doctors in Waymart, Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere, big busy doctor. And Dr. McAndrews would say, Mark, Geisinger doesn't cover this. I see a lot of Geisinger patients, and it's kind of a pain to write it. And then I get a call from the pharmacy. And I would say, Dr. McAndrews, I understand. But here's what Geisinger Health Plan is telling our people, is that they don't see any demand. And if they don't see demand, they see no reason to even consider it. But I understand your position. If you demand it, or you're requesting it, or you're writing it, and your patients are upset, I get it. So could we do something like this? Could you maybe take 10 patients that you feel like this drug fits in and is appropriate and prescribe it? And then if they get it kicked back, we'll get you free samples, and they can have all the free samples they want, because we need it to show up in the system that doctors are requesting the product. But I understand it's an incredible inconvenience to you and your patient, and I'll do whatever I can to make it less inconvenient. And they would say, especially Doc McAndrews would be like, I'm not sure. And I would say, listen, Dr. McAndrews, I get it. But understand, every time you request it, it lights up in the system in Geisinger. And it's not just you that's doing it. We have doctors all over northern and central Pennsylvania who are doing this. You're not alone. You're one of a large group. And I promise you, and by the way, here was the key that I think we were taught that I thought was really important that I use now. Dr. McAndrews, I promise you, if you do this, we will be sitting with them within 3 months, and we will likely get this approved. I want you to understand that what you do will have an effect. The idea was you need them to have some hope, right? Because there was nobody who could just write in and say, hey, I need this approved by Geisinger Health Plan, and Geisinger Health Plan would do it. That didn't exist. You needed groundswell. You needed enthusiasm. And that's what we went out. And this is a sales force of about, in that area, using that example, we probably had 30 to 40 salespeople. And we were hitting hundreds of doctors with this. And then the health plan finally said, you know what? There does seem to be something to this. Let's sit down. Let's see if we should maybe consider having this approved, right? That's how we would get groundswell. Now think about that. I actually think this may be where we go. I don't know if it's going to be with health plans or if it's going to be with health systems. But I can tell you this. If I ran a large company, med device company, and I was struggling to get mine approved, I would have a structural plan in place where I had somebody who's calling on those health systems, and I had every single rep that wore my badge or sold my product pushing this. Now, I know 1099 and that stuff like that's a different story. I understand that. That's where some of the variance from this occurs. But I can tell you, I would have a structural setup, a strategy, And then I would also have a sales pitch in place to answer those questions and tell these people why I'm asking you to request this. It's like the prior auth process that we often hear about. But I think this is the way it might be going. And I'm telling you, because we were so hyper focused on this, and we would do this every single day for 90 days, whatever it was. And we constantly communicated back and forth with our strategic account rep, all of us, all the reps. Here's another person. This one said they're going to write prescriptions or writing them, but you can also use their name. They'll write a letter if we need. We'd do it. We'd show there was need. We'd show there was requests. And then ultimately we'd get it approved. And I'm urging companies, I think companies need to think about it this way. I see these companies with huge footprints, all their staff in these hospitals, and I see very little strategy, particularly the closer you get to the OR. Other places, ER, ICU, ED, different story. But in the OR, I really see a lack of strategy and a lack of structure. I think this is where we're going. I'm curious. I don't know. I'm predicting the future. But if it's like these stories, they're all the same. They're just told in a different voice with different Luke Skywalker versus Beowulf. It's all this. At the end of the day, it's all the same. And I actually think this is where we're going. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer. I help companies get their products approved. And this has been Sutures and Cents. We'll see you next week.